The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as long as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them truly about the same. And both that matin equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Big ol' Robert Frost. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mir, ni hao. Buenos dias, heseche, akwaba, velkomen. What up, though? This is Convo with Zuri G. I am Peter Johansson OCC, aka Zuri G. And today we have a conversation with Brother Keith. Brother Keith and I meet a number of years ago in our involvement with the Native community and here in the Cuyahoga area, and advocating for the changing of the name of the Cleveland baseball team. And in those initial meetings with Cleveland AIM, and additionally, he and I also talk about ethics and other activist fronts, and we find a similar interest in commitment towards ethical economics. He is a democratic socialist, if labels are appropriately held in such a manner, but he shares that type of inclination, and that's been much of the premise of our communication and cooperation in the years preceding that first meeting. We, with additional brethren, established an ethics-based co-op focusing on fair trade, vegan, and organic products. And he and I meet on numerous occasions through the years, having long conversations about political philosophy, pragmatism, and improvement of community, society, family, individual, all that. So this convo that he and I have was actually about a month or two ago, and it's actually a little bit off guard because he's a family man, and so he's busy raising children and being with his wife, and so the availability of having those type of convos is comparatively less frequent these days. So he and I had a talk scheduled on some pragmatic matters. And I kind of like throw the invite of having a convo for this podcast. He's like, okay. So we had the convo right then and there, and so that's what this is. And it's about 40 minutes. To be honest, I have to think about the details. I'm about to listen to it, and I'll comment about it accordingly, but that's pretty much the gist of it. So with that, here it is. All right, we are rolling. So what's up, Keith? How you doing?
I'm doing well.
All right. We were just talking, and I dropped this proposition on you in terms of recording this for an episode or a session on the podcast. So I recognize that you may be somewhat flustered or very impromptu, but
Appreciate your generosity and your capabilities, your extemporaneous skills for rolling with this joint.
Absolutely.
All right.
I mean, my experience with you is that even our most mundane seeming conversations turn out to be fundamental, philosophical, and so we'll see what happens.
Cool. All right, nice. So, all right, now I'll share with you I have a certain structure that I share in these conversations, which includes one describing how we met, as just to give people an understanding of like the context of our relationship, um, and then inviting you to talk about your ancestry, like your heritage, where you're coming from to be where you are today, all to set like the tone for the topic of our convo. Um, and so just to to clear about that, my thought for the topic today is just talk about our the pragmatics of our ideology, I've sent you some recent communications about actually doing the bank account for crowdfunding efforts, and that's actually connected with this podcast at this point. And but through the years we've also talked about social justice, democratic socialism, and additional cooperatives, and you've been involved with votive co-op through the years, and so we've had, like you said, a number of conversations on these topics, and so the consideration is today talking about the pragmatics of supporting this type of activism, but also particularly in the context of what's going on today amidst the pandemic, and additionally, and how we proceed mindfully and prudently amidst these conditions. So does that sound like a decent like frame of reference, or a context for the convo?
Uh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So again, like I said, I'll just start by saying how we met, how I remember us meeting. And it was a few years ago. I'm trying to think how many years ago at this point. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe four,
I think it was 4 years
five,
ago.
somewhere like that. 4 years. Let's say 4 years ago, and even four. Yeah. Okay. And I was at the airport. Waiting to get picked up to attend the Cleveland AIM meeting, and you arrived with the young sister. Her name escapes me at the moment. Um,
That was Waya or B.
B, yeah, that's it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So a very pronounced character, and I remember you two pulling up in the vehicle, and there was the no Wahoo insignias on the side paneling, and I was like, okay, here we go. And
Right.
that's where we met. You were in the passenger seat, and so I got in the vehicle, and we just started driving to Oberlin. So, and since then, after that meeting, you and I stay in contact with each other, and we talked about ethics based cooperatives, we had the convo at the coffee house, and from there, we ended up to contribute to a cooperative, and we've like you said, have some had some sit down talks and meetings about the co-op, and actually completed a modest number of purchases, and talked about our political philosophies and activism in the context, or amidst all that. So that's what I remember the meeting being. Does that sound like recognizable for you as well?
Uh, yeah.
Okay.
That sounds right. That I think it was. I'm not sure if it was the Cleveland AIM meeting or I think it was a different. It was under the different
auspices. I
forget which group it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Was it Cleveland AIM? Was that it?
Yeah.
Maybe you're right.
There's Cleveland.
Anyway.
You might be thinking of the American Indian Education Center. So it was other than through the auspices of that particular organization, but it was through Sundance, who was the executive director of Cleveland AIM, and so he was the one presiding over the meeting, as I recall.
That's right. That's definitely right.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it was under. At least I thought it was under some other auspices, but
okay.
I think maybe it was a coalition of groups that included Sundance, or maybe I just didn't understand what the meaning was.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's funny, but yeah, generally that's what happened. Right. And then you followed up with an email, I believe, and said, you had this idea for this fair trade vegan co-op, and would anybody like to be involved? And I like to when I hear a good idea, I like to see if I can contribute. So I responded, and yeah, we started meeting. I think almost every week.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, sounds about right. And
Um,
you share with me your yoga practice as well, here and there,
that's right.
and you humble me because I remember I'm looking at the fan at the moment, and I remember I did my yoga my yoga routine, and when I put my hands up to do that particular asana, I don't have any problem with the fan, but when you did it, I was like, oh, my bad. You're like, yeah,
Oh,
this.
I extended a little closer to the ceiling.
Exactly. So it just helps to get humbled about that perspective thing of like, just because something works for us, it's beneficial to recognize that people might have different experiences, different requirements, and additionally, and so it's beneficial to look at the categorical imperative or the genuine experience of universality as it applies to all individuals.
I'm only 6'3"
I
for
know,
the listeners.
but your
I'm not
wingspan
at the
though,
extreme. I'm not at the extreme of universality.
it was enough. It was enough to reach the fan though.
Yeah,
That's what I remember, and that was the critical part. So, anyways, but all right. So with that kind of said, what I do is invite you to like just talk about your ancestry, your heritage, like how you get to be in this place where we are today.
Oh well, um, I grew up in Massachusetts in a suburb of Boston. Both my parents are from Long Island, New York.
Okay.
And so as far as back beyond before then, I don't know a whole lot. My dad's from England,
Okay.
and then the other three grandparents were all from New York as well. And you know, going further back, they're from, I guess, Ireland and Germany. But I don't have connections in Ireland or Germany to any family. A little bit in England.
Okay.
So yeah, basically northeast of the of America, where my family ties are. I don't have much frame of reference going back a lot further. The sort of religious traditions are Catholic and Protestant.
Okay.
But both of my parents had left their religions by the time I was born.
Okay.
And I was never brought up with a religion. So yeah, I think maybe there's a unusual disconnect that I have from my ancestry, but
I think actually what you
that's what
described.
it is.
Oh, excuse me. I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, but that's what it is.
Okay. I think what the experience that you described is actually very, very common within our society, um, and and so I think it's probably further usual than you might think. And all that being said, what I know you to be is a very compassionate, empathic, and thoughtful man, and a family man, a husband, and a father, and very soft spoken, but also like stand upish. I mean, stand how do I say stand up, and even righteous, because the foundation of our conversations is on the premise of social justice, and basically just doing what's right, and particularly given your status today as a family man, and with those responsibilities and all that's involved with that, for you to even be involved in that type of activism and interest. I mean, you mentioned just being off a phone call for that. Um, that says a lot about who you are as an individual and as a man, where your commitments are, but also where your ethics are, and how you practice your beliefs. And so that is something that is rather pronounced, and it comes from someplace, and it comes from your parents, obviously, but it also comes from the additional teachings and teachers that surround you through your life. And so, one of the follow up questions I ask is, um, I mean, I remember one of the first conversations that we have in those meetings, you hand me that booklet on democratic socialism, and so one of the questions I ask is, how did you arrive at um, this political ideology of altruism and being in the interest of others in society?
Um, well, thank you for the kind words. That sometimes I wonder what my sometimes I think, oh, I must seem rather ridiculous to people.
Mm,
But um, you know, I say that because I'm a person who um, doesn't have um, a full time job like in my kind of neighborhood.
mm,
That um, it seems a little bit. I mean, it's in my bad moments. I feel like it's like a bit ridiculous, but it is true that it was a conscious decision, at least to some extent, that when one has their needs taken care of, um, and others don't, um, what's the thing to do?
mm,
I think it's not to um, continue. But basically, I decided to drop everything and work for justice,
mm,
which in my estimation means making sure that people have um, are treated with dignity, and there's just so much so many people who aren't afforded that around me, and it's kind of difficult for me to operate.
I hear you.
So I've tried going to grad school or having various jobs, and I find it difficult to concentrate
Mm,
because I'm my mind keeps going to these social justice issues. Um, I don't know where that originated. My mom tells me that when I was a toddler, I asked her, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Like an existential question, like, "What is the purpose of what we're here? I feel capable. I'm good at stuff. What are we doing?"
Yeah.
And she said that she didn't know what to say. She just said, "Well, we just try to be a good people." And so there's something to be said about parental influence there, I suppose.
Sure.
Um, in my teenage years or college years, I think I lapsed into not lapsed, but like philosophically, I sometimes thought my thinking verged on nihilism. Like,
Ah.
there isn't really a purpose here. Like what is it? Um, and the justice comes from a sense that feel when I felt like there's some injustice done to me, like sure the person or people who may have wronged me, or that my anger was primarily just directed at, that's one thing, but like should what should have happened here?
Mm,
Oh, there should have been people standing up for me. Like
mm,
I shouldn't have to fight for what I think is right. That's sort of the responsibility, I think, of community, is to
sure.
say these are the things we think are right, and the community um, believes this, and so it's the community that is going to fight for these kind of abstract ideas of like, this is what is right and this is what is wrong. And so, you know, it did, in that sense, I can sort of locate my, as you describe it, altruism in something selfish, which is that I have this anger for things I don't even remember, you know, just anybody gets angry. And this is like sort of, my style is to retreat into philosophy and say, oh, what should be done here? What is, like, you know, what, and also like, what is my purpose? Like, what is, how can I feel purposeful? And I think the answer is to help create a sense of what is just for society, and also to help fight for the things that society has already realized is just, or sometimes it's just a very small subset of society. And that's how I find myself in the activist community, where I find other people who have similar ideas about what it means to have community and what it means to be just and live righteously.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have sort of a dual purpose, which is help spread the idea that justice is important, and also to fight for the people for whom justice is not being realized. And my idea of what justice is definitely evolved. And at some point, it came to include access to the things that I consider, that I take for granted, and I consider necessary, that I think everybody should be able to have. And if it's something that could not be provided for everybody, then, well, those are luxuries, you know. But to the extent that I have luxuries, I try to see where I can share, and to the extent where other people are lacking necessities, I consider those injustices. And over the years, I came to realize that there's sort of a political movement that has a similar idea of justice being tied to these material ideas. And so for many years, I just sort of was sympathetic to socialism. I never really considered myself a socialist because, well, I don't think it's well defined. Very recently, I decided labeling myself socialist, the benefits outweighed the sort of confusion about the word, because I do think that there's something to be said for uniting around an idea. And even though the idea of socialism is rather fuzzy, I think people have a good enough idea that it's worth sort of throwing in my I don't know what word to use, but my
affiliation,
my own humanity behind that movement.
Okay.
So that's how I come to it. When I gave you the book, I wasn't calling myself a socialist yet.
Okay.
I just thought the ideas were important.
Right. Okay. And I was careful not to say that, and not to like label you accordingly, because like we haven't had that kind of type of, like you just said, like I'm this, that, and the other. But I just mentioned like you share the idea, so that is a significant thing in and of itself. But I kind of am in the same boat with you in that regards, because I have a tendency of or a certain hesitancy, I should say, about labeling myself with any ism, politically, economically, even religiously per se. So that there's that, just I think that a lot of people have that kind of hesitancy. But simultaneously, there, when we do like see the tenets of a certain way of doing things, or a certain methodology that is an explicit ism, then we can say, well, that a lot of that resonates with me. And so again, I'm a kind of like I said, I've made reach a similar conclusion as you in terms of like maybe a cloudy socialist or something to that effect, because it's the closest thing that's contemporarily articulated within today's parlance that speaks to the economic policy and methodology that I support. But simultaneously, me being the spiritual, I call myself a spiritual diplomat, and now I'm a spiritual teacher at this point. But in my spirituality, what I look at is this: the true enemy, like the actual enemy, is greed, hatred, and delusion. And ultimately, within this life, like we are the enemy, like we ourselves are the worst culprits of that. And so rather than pointing fingers or worrying about like drawing borders or boundaries between people and whatever, what I've found in my observation of people in life and everything else is that greed, hatred, and delusion exists within every type of ism, whether it's capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever, democracy, dictatorship, or whatever. That greed, hatred, and delusion can be evidenced in each of these types of methodologies. And the concern is how those methodologies those labels can be a way of covering up that greed, hatred, and delusion, and then accusing the other ism of having that. And so instead of just looking at the pure, or the, I shouldn't say pure, like the actual greed, hatred, and delusion within the ism, we just say, oh, this is our ism, and so there can't be anything wrong with that. It's that ism over there. That's what I have a challenge with, and that's what I diligently work towards not doing. So I call myself, or I like yourself, I say I subscribe to socialist tenets. And I cite examples like Scandinavia, and additionally as like tangible examples of the type of policies that I support. But I also emphasize that it's just greed, hatred, and delusion. And that can be found in any ism, and that's what we have to be mindful of avoiding.
It's interesting. So the idea, one of the key ideas I think you just expressed, if I understand it, is that when um, when ideas are given labels, the label, it's, I don't know if you mean the label itself or the ideas underlying them tend to obscure greed, hatred, and delusion.
Yeah.
And huh.
Yeah.
What about an idea that is just, you know, anti-greedism, for example? I mean, like I
Sure.
could put an ism at the end of an
course.
idea that
I want to pause right there and just make a point of clarification. It's not the idea; it's the system that emerges from the idea, or that's drawn from the idea. So it's the system is the ism, the implementation of it, and the challenge is that with any system, once the system becomes successful to propagate itself, then it tends to be increasingly corrupted, because it goes like we know about like the stages of civilization, and from going from the golden era to like the crescendo and everything. So every system has that susceptibility, just because that's the nature of systems in a certain way. And so the challenge is that when the system starts becoming, and it can emerge from like a very genuine thing, but when it becomes increasingly conventional, and then it just becomes like a self-sustaining entity, and as such, people kind of get reverted into certain cogs within that system. And it can happen at an early stage, it can happen at a later stage, but that's just what I identify. So that it's the system, and the label attributed to the system, that tends to be a cover for the greed, hatred, and delusion that emerges amidst that complacency within the system. And so that's the concern, because I think what happens is that a lot of people just they identify, they pick up a flag, whatever that ism is, and they say this is beneficial, and any other ism against that is antagonistic, is evil, or whatever else. And so that can be a very simple binary to kind of mass produce. But it overlooks the flaws, because every individual has imperfections. Thus, any system that emanates from individual intrinsically has imperfections as well. And so, rather than addressing and continuing and painfully addressing those imperfections, it's just a matter of saying, "Oh no, we don't have any imperfections. This is a pure idea, or this is a pure system." It's because whatever suffering, whatever angst, whatever poverty, or what affliction that we're experiencing is because of those people that don't do what we're doing. And so that's what I take issue with. And again, it's not a matter of being antagonistic. It's just a matter of being mindful of the nature of things. And that even when we find a system that is increasingly favorable and maybe optimally favorable amongst all the other systems that are around, we can subscribe to that system, but still doing so with a mindfulness of that it's still not perfect, and we have to be careful about being complacent within the trappings and the imperfections of that system accordingly.
See, my mind is going to like the ways that a system could protect itself from your criticism.
Okay.
For example, it could be incorporated into socialism that one of the tenets, I guess, would be reflection upon whether it's been, or to what extent, I guess, would be a better way to put it, greed, hatred, and delusion have been allowed to take hold. I mean, would that matter? Do you think that such a thing could be done?
I think it can be done. I think it's plausible. I mean, at that point you're talking about like a utopian scenario, and if we're looking at perfection and striving to be perfect, we can be at like a 99% level, and then and work towards being 99.5 or 99.6 or 99.9. But that increasingly is a philosophical conversation. Meanwhile, we have to like answer how we're feeding ourselves today, how we're putting food on the table, shelter over our head, clothes on our back, and additionally today. And so I think having that 99.5% conversation is beneficial. But in the meanwhile, we have to like address where the circumstances are today, where we might be at 30%. And how we get increasingly up to that point. So like I said, I agree with like socialism as an effective entity. And actually, I want to get into this because that goes into like what we've been like addressing up to this point in terms of our convos and the point of this conversation today. But I think we there's a possibility, there is the propensity, at least conceptually, of a system being perfected. I abstain from negating that. But I just recognize, just looking at history, looking at the way of human civilization and all the different type of systems and methodologies that humans establish, that there is an intrinsic nature towards organization itself, or human organization itself, that has certain susceptibilities. And that when glossing over those susceptibilities by just adhering to a rote label, then there's a certain amount of a deficiency within that. And so my notion is not to detract from socialism or any other ism per se. My emphasis is just to recognize what the genuine culprit is, and how that culprit exists and has the tendency of existing, if that might not be contradictory, or how it exists intrinsically within every system, and because of that, to be mindful in minimizing the nature of its existence within every system and any system.
There's a kind of tongue-in-cheek question,
okay,
that a socialist like magazine editor would ask his interns, and he'd ask them, "Is your hate pure?" And what he meant was like, do you have an intense hatred of injustice? And so it's interesting that you identify hatred as one of the core evils. I don't think you said evils. One of the core enemies, I think, is the word used.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think of that.
So I think
should we hate injustice, or should we? Is there something about the word hatred?
I think it's a little bit of a potato situation, because I mean, you can articulate the same sentiment in an increasingly affirmational rhetoric of just, is your love pure? And then the question is, what is the nature of your love? What is the subject? What is the recipient of your love? And so I think it's the same point that the editor of that magazine is making, but one of the benefits of that is because it's not a double negative. And the challenge with the double negative and the emphasis of hate, I draw from my spiritual teachings at this point, and that's just who I am. But one of the teachings that I subscribe to, it comes from the Buddha and the Dhammapada, that hate hatred doesn't end with hate. It's only through love that hatred ends. So, and also just understanding the nature of hate itself, it's a quick burn. And yes, the flame can get high, and it can seem very effective, and it can be very strong motivation, but it also burns out eventually. Love, on the other hand, is a constant. It's a continual, balanced burn, warmth per se, we can say. And so the consideration is, what's the objective in that hate? What's if one is concerned about having a pure hate, quote unquote, what's the purpose of that? What's the objective in the long run? Ultimately, what's the objective of that? And then how can that? What's the best way of attaining that objective? And I contend, I offer, I proffer, I submit that the best way of attaining that objective is through love. And again, it can be a game of rhetoric, of utilizing a double negative, or using an affirmational. But I also share this wisdom that when we're teaching children, and we tell children, oh, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Yes, there's benefit with that. There's legitimacy within that. There's necessity within that. But that in and of itself doesn't tell a child what to do. Don't eat that. Don't eat that. Don't eat that. Okay, cool. That's beneficial. But what does the child eat at that point? At some point, we have to be affirmational. At some point, we have to be positive, and we have to say what to do. And that's what love does. Love says what to do. Hate is just saying don't do this, don't do that, and it's so easy to be antagonistic, and it's so easy to be impervious in that antagonism, because it's very difficult to disprove a critic. It's easy to pick somebody apart, and find out all the flaws, and it's very difficult to to respond to the critic without being critical. Additionally, so the love is the positive, it's the affirmational. It tells us what to do, it tells us how to construct, how to build, and that's the emphasis. And again, it's a potato kind of rhetoric, semantics, but it's actually very purposeful, and eventually there's a very fundamental distinction between the two approaches.
Right. Yeah. I think that you're. I like what you're saying. I think that the question is like, I took it as sort of tongue in cheek, but I think there is something deeper in what you're suggesting by asking that question, which is that he thinks maybe that the idea should be to harness the kind of anger that one feels at injustices and use that to maybe inspire people into the movement, or
Sure.
I can't help but and on the flip side being, okay, the anger is just there to signal that something is wrong, and then you need to search for the love within it and use that to guide action. I think I'm going to reflect on this further as I read Malcolm X, because he's somebody who I think might be, I might unfairly think of him as being an angry type who was able to channel his hatred. But when I read him, it's I'll say that it's actually love that's emanating. It's kind of I'm going to reread some of him, I think, with this in mind.
Cool. And I'll say one other thing, but I also want to advance our convo as well, given the time constraints that we're working with. The other thing is also, particularly when we're dealing with youth, when you talk about that scenario of the editor dealing with like the intern or whatever, youth can see what's happening, and youth are increasingly attuned to truth, because youth have less of a stake in the atrocities that have been committed, and the tendency of hiding away from that through double talk and polite facades and everything else like that. So youth have an increased propensity of being awake, calling out injustices, and like addressing that. So there's that. Now, simultaneously, that's a huge step, as you already know. It's a huge step to kind of like call things out. But even in doing that, and particularly as youth, it's one thing to call things out, but then it's another thing to actually like do something about it and to see the efficacy of what we do. And that's one of the challenges between the two approaches of hate and love, because hate, like I said, it's a quick fire, it's a high burn. And it's also very increasingly susceptible to manipulation because it's not thinking. People get hot heads when they hate, and that hot head can be very easily or increasingly easily manipulated to doing different things. And one of the things that's utilized to manipulate the hot head, or the cold head, or the cold heart, actually is the thought, the cold heart or the hot head. One of the things that's utilized amongst those who do the manipulation is showing the results, showing the effects, because that hot headedness, or cold heartedness can be utilized to like go egg the house of an ambassador or something else, or go to do a protest and like get arrested or whatever else, or do something that just shows that something's being done. Whereby often the people who talk about love say, well, let's be calm, let's think about something, and the youth don't see the results, don't see the efficacy of the calm approach. They say, well, you're just sitting here talking, you're doing words, I don't see no results. But here's the guy doing the anger and the hatred, and let's take it to the streets, and I see some results of that. We're doing something effective. We're getting something done. And so that's the other susceptibility of the hate approach, because it seems like it's doing something. But I've been around the game for a number of generations at this point, and I've seen the limitations of even that. How oftentimes those organizers are actually enveloped in the system themselves, and just continuing a cyclical process of churning out activisms to reach a certain threshold of efficacy before people are arrested, before it gets thwarted, before something gets called out or whatever, corruption or whatever else. And then at the same time, like the things status quo continues. And so to the person who's new to it, the young mind, the young heart, they might see the tactics of the hate and say, oh, that's doing something. But in actuality, it's actually doing very little. And it's kind of just getting enveloped in the system, because that's the nature of the atrocities. The atrocities are built from that, again, that greed, hatred, and delusion. The other thing also with hate is that, oh, it's such a fine line between love and hate, as they say. And so yes, very much people's love and compassion and empathy for others and the injustice that others are experiencing is just a very fine line between that love and it being turned into hate, that is destructive rather than constructive. So that's one other thing I'll share as well.
All right. I'm noticing the time. I think I had better go in a minute.
Okay. These are the topics that I'm interested in further talking with you about. And like I said, like we talked about before, maybe we'll do a dot and pick this up later. But I'll just share this with you. There's a brother named Ranzo who's from Jamaica, and he has a YouTube channel called Black Experience Japan. So he's of African ancestry, but he lives in Japan. And what he does is he does like a media project where he talks with other people of African ancestry who are living in Asia. And they talk about a lot of different things about what the experience is, what they're doing, and additionally what the differences are between the East and the West, and additionally. So with the situation of the pandemic, and additionally, particularly as it emanates from East Asia, some of the things that he's been talking about recently has been on that. And so I actually participated in a recent live stream that he has this past week. And I got caught off a little guard because I wasn't ready to talk at that moment, but he asked me some questions, and I'm like, oh, here I go. I got to say something now. But basically, the question that he asked me is, what do I see happening in the next year? Like, where do I see it? Where do I see people next year, a year after all this? What do I see developing? And so I kind of gave a little bit of a response, but not necessarily what I would ultimately, ideally share. So I have some follow up on that. But my consideration for our combo here at this moment and continuing is to pose that same question to you. Where do you see things turning or ending up in a year from now? Where do you see people being, society being in a year from now? And I'll give you like how this pertains to like the social justice front, because we know like in the United States particularly, one of the major industries is service, and that's one of the major industries that's being shut down. Restaurants and bars and stuff like that, and so that poses a very significant potential of an increasingly significant chasm, schism even between upper class and lower class, blue collar and white collar. And when people are living paycheck to paycheck already as it is, in a month from this point, if everybody's still, or if a lot of people are still out of work, that means they're not be able to pay the rent, and then so that has implications as well. And people have talked about the government stepping in and doing some type of forgiveness or whatever else. So that's one thing. But then even further, let alone not paying rent after a month from this point, particularly for cats who are living paycheck to paycheck, not being able to go to the store and get groceries and additionally. And so we're looking at the necessity of policy changes on the government, not just for the sake of social justice, but for the sake of social stability. Um, we're already dealing with a lockdown, and so we have to be mindful of the propensity of even a martial law. I mean, the lockdown as it is basically a science-based martial law, and that may be a convo for another topic for another convo. But it's increasingly relaxed. I mean, a lot of it is voluntary or whatever, but there's the propensity of things getting increasingly serious when if amidst the likelihood of certain challenges being unmet within the next month or two, and without. I mean, some people talk about the circumstances that lasting for a month, maybe a couple months. Some people have talked about businesses already telling their employees that things are shut down until the end of the summer or till fall or winter. So we're dealing with some long term type of things that the government and that decision makers have to address, just for the sake of social stability, and not just for the impoverished people or lower class. That's also for upper class as well, who are adversely affected. And so, amidst all this, what I see myself is opportunities, and it's not a matter of like getting advantage of people's affliction, but it's just a matter of when we talk about social justice and we talk about governments providing incentives or grants or forgiveness or whatever else. There's the consideration for those who are of a proficient mind and discipline to say, okay, you know what, the government is ready to hear some new ideas. The government is receptive to conversation, to negotiation about community development paradigms. And so a lot of the co-op stuff that you and I have been talking about through the years, and that people have been very hesitant and additionally on signing on to, perhaps there's an increased amount of motivation for people to give these kind of thoughts, give these kind of endeavors and projects some ear and some participation, particularly as an alternative to just relying upon the local grocery store or whatever to get groceries. If we're working with villages in other countries and getting distributions directly to where we are, then we're increasingly autonomous and independent and self-sufficient from the grid. And that's something that seems to be increasingly favorable and of interest to the general public at this moment, as people have the tendency of hoarding and everything else like that. So there's all I'm saying is that we have an increasing opportunity for that type of year, and not just for like co-op purchases, whatever, but actually like residential co-ops, like we were talking about before, and additionally. So that's what I would bring to the conversation. But that's the kind of context that I have in asking you that question of what do you see in the next year, and what do you think to be the objectives that socially conscious individuals should consider in preparing in the short term at this very moment, but also for the next year, recognizing that in these type of conditions, decision makers, authorities, and additionally are increasingly receptive to new ideas, but not just new ideas, but responsible ideas, particularly responsible ideas articulated by an organized political bloc that communicates the interest of the well-being of the public and society at large. So that's the consideration for the Convo.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to continue this another time.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I will say that one of the sort of policy ideas that I've been excited about for 10 years, maybe even, is a universal basic income, which would directly address the poverty issue in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. And people have been talking about that as a way to help people in this pandemic. And so already I've been contacting some people who I know feel similarly about whether this might be a good moment to ask our local leaders whether they might be able to step up and fill the gap left by the federal government's decision to go with a one-time payment, I guess, is what they decided on, instead of a monthly payment, which is what a UBI would be. And so if we could get that done in a local level, even at temporary, even maybe to the end of the year, whatever, then some infrastructure would be put there. So yeah, I've been thinking along those lines as well. I do think that, well, we're going to have to continue this conversation later because I have to go. So, all right, this was fun, and I'll talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds well. Any closing message as we wrap up? Anything for like the next for upcoming generations, and additionally, just as we wrap up and we do a ... to the next convo.
Oh gosh, I don't have anything that I can sum up quickly.
All right.
I'm afraid.
Okay. Cool. I appreciate the time, Keith, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
All right. Well, love and peace.
Bye. Love and peace to you.
Yo, the joint ended right at the height of the spiel. So to be honest, I'm just gonna record this kind of wrap up, and I'm gonna see if I can find another recording of that convo. There, to be honest, there's only maybe a minute or two left, because Brother Keith leaves the phone call right at that point, but. So I'm going to look to see if I can find another recording of that convo to see if it has the full recording of it. Otherwise, it's just going to be as it is, because that was pretty much the whole of it. But I appreciate that convo actually, and it's interesting because it's Keith that turns into the interviewer. I observe it, and that's actually kind of like typical of our conversations. He poses questions, and then I start talking, and then he responds to that as well. But he has a very dignified, quiet, like a quiet presence, because I'm trying to think of the right word. I want to say like regal almost, because he can sit and like let the other person talk, and then maybe respond with even just a question that doesn't necessarily reveal or explicitly what he's actually thinking, or the point that he's making, or the argument that he's making on certain occasions, but by posing that question, shaping a response, or the tone, or the path of the conversation according to what he's thinking. And sometimes, well, yeah, but it's also there's shared building as well. So anyways, I'm just in listening to this convo, I'm appreciating how disciplined he is in listening, because I was talking a lot, as I can do on occasion, and him responding accordingly. So, but he shares some very beneficial insight, I think, actually, when it comes to his experience, his personal experience, his background, how he cultivates his altruistic ideology and activism and pragmatism. I think that's something that many people can relate with, probably further readily than can relate with my personal experience. So that's beneficial to be shared. I appreciate the topic we address in terms of the distinction between love and hate, and the building on that. His insight about Malcolm Shabazz, I think, is appropriate, and there's a lot that could be said, built from just in some of the words that are shared in this particular convo for many additional convos, and that's actually kind of where we left the convo, as I recall, with a ... and the intention of picking up at some additional point. So I'm trying to think if he and I have talked since then. I think that might have been the most recent occasion that we talk. So, like I said, that was one of the reasons why I kind of put him on the spot in terms of having that convo at that moment, because I was like, hey, we got this window, let's do something. So, and to be honest, as I think about this is something I think actually that his children would enjoy listening to, and hearing him talk about his experience and how he arrives at things, particularly as his children mature, God willing. So, and even his wife and his family and friends and my family and everybody else. So anyways, people in general, how about that? So that's what I'm gonna say about the convo at this point. Now in terms of like the business or the materiality of the podcast, we are structuring it in a certain way. I've mentioned in previous weeks that we've kind of been on hiatus in terms of our approach, particularly because of contemporary circumstances. And additionally, initially the intention was doing some I've avoided doing this for years, the merchandise thing, or like the I don't want to call it gimmicky, but like the standard kind of things that people do. So we were preparing something along those lines actually. However, because of the conditions at the moment, it just didn't seem So we're actually going back to the basics and the foundation of what our work is. And when I'm saying I'm talking about Asona Arsha, I'm talking about Melange Ethos Institute. I'm talking about just righteousness. So basically, what the thing is, first I'll say we accept gift cards for Etsy. So that's one thing. That can be mailed to the email address pfwjo and the number 1 at gmail.com. But that's whatever. That's not the main thing I'm sharing at the moment. What I share is that from this point, what we're establishing is a monthly membership type joint, which is 1% of people's income, or if it's an organization, the organization's income. But basically, and it's on your honor system. But basically setting up a mechanism to receive contributions, 1% for the membership for the month, and that monthly membership provides the members with a monthly publication, and we're putting together a monthly newsletter. That's what we're sending to our circle, our network, and people who subscribe to that. So that's what we send to anybody who's interested in that. And for people who are interested in providing a monthly contribution to be a monthly member, providing a monthly publication of writing about different topics. Each month it's a different thing. It might be, or things that we're working on right now is like interfaith, like healing prayers, healing songs, healing chants. Another monthly publication is on pluralism culture. Another monthly publication is on topics of world citizenship, reconciliation. I mean, it's just a topical month by month type of thing. And so the membership provides an individual with the access to that monthly publication, and there's the intention of including audio visual recordings on particular publications as well. So that's the thing. And again, it's 1% of a person's or a family's or an organization's income. So it's on people's honor system, and that's one of the most egalitarian kind of methodologies that we can perceive, we can think of pragmatically at this moment. So that is what we are arranging, and still working on details. That's what we're planning. And I'll say, let's see, in the monthly newsletter, I've got notes. We have on the full moon, we have a community call on Zoom. So we had actually the first one this past week with the full moon before Vesak Puja. And there are actually 2 people who attend. Yay. And actually that's genuine, but it's also blase skip. But anyways, that's what we're doing. We started this past month a monthly community call right before the full moon. So we're sharing the details accordingly. Monthly publication, and the publication includes, the newsletter includes the podcast schedule for the upcoming month. So which sessions, what convos are upcoming, with and a brief blurb on those convos. Also, a monthly contributions and membership contributions and tithing report. So basically, all the contributions that we received in the past month, materially and additionally, putting in the newsletter, so it's made available for public information. And then link to the regular materials that are provided through our auspices, through our Son Ashram and Melon J. Ethos Institute. That includes weekly considerations and additionally that I've been doing for years. And then something of a light heart. And also, just as an FYI for those who are familiar with the situation, my personal methodology up to this point of communication is rather extremely modest and informal, meaning like I send out emails, and sometimes the emails may be one-to-one to people, to recipients. Sometimes it's a bulk email that I put together manually rather than through like a mail email service like MailChimp or whatever it's called. There are pluses with that, but there are also significant minuses. And one of the minuses is one, some people, like I have a network of a circle of brethren, family and friends that are very different from each other, and actually, to be honest, may not like each other too tough. And so to be included in the same email, and particularly to have email addresses included in the same joint, it's pushing a little bit. But cats up to this point say little to me directly because they know for one reason or another it's like, yeah, it's him doing that. So all that being said, the other thing is that that also precludes people's propensity of unsubscribing without actually explicitly saying, yo, stop sending me stuff. So I'm careful, I'm mindful of how much I send and how I send it additionally, but still it may be so uncomfortable for people. So all that being said, what we're working on is transitioning to a mail email, keep saying that, an email system or whatever, where we, like, to be honest, I'm less familiar with how the specific mechanics of MailChimp. I've seen that or received that before, but one of those joints, and sending that out so that for those who do want to unsubscribe without causing offense or fear of causing offense, who want to unsubscribe, then can do so, and then respond accordingly, and we can keep I can keep a better record of recipients and respondents, and additionally, because at this point, like I'm just going off of my personal memory of like who's responded and following up, and additionally, so it helps to be increasingly systemic. Look at that hypocrisy. Anyways, it helps to be increasingly organized. How about that? That's a step towards it. Anyways, it helps to be organized and attentive to what people's responsiveness is, and additionally. So that's one of the things that we're developing as well. Oh, and guess what? Ain't got no phone. Guess what? Ain't got no internet. And so that helps to provide additional experiences, lessons, stories amidst the challenges in this process. So even just the methodology of how I'm doing these podcasts at this point is much change. I'm making video recordings that I've been doing for years and years and years because I'm familiar and I know how to do it. And then I'm going to, just for your information, I'm going to what's it called? The movie joint on Apple, the iMovie or whatever it is, and then transitioning it to a verbal audio recording, so it's less memory, and then uploading that onto the Anchor platform as individual segments, so that I can do the musical interlude for each segment, and then putting that together as an episode. So it's actually, well, it's increasingly involved, but it is what it is at the moment. So, but that factors into the situation as well. So this is where we are today. I might have mentioned before that we're in communication with World Service Authority about a project for World Citizen Villages. So that's something in the works, and that's like bringing a number of these elements together in terms of economic cooperation, Mélanger advocacy, pluralism, culture, and global ethics, wealth ethos, all together. So we continue with our building with Native brethren, with Native heritage campuses or campi, and life goes on. So there it is. Appreciation for your perspiration in your consideration. And with that, I say Auf Wiedersehen. Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom. Mir, Zaijian, adios, te chakris, esimpina asamugo, kele ufred. One love and peace, happiness and liberation.